Yes, the situation is ugly almost all over Gaza, but had it not been for the fact that Hamas has a strategic design to leverage humanitarian suffering in order to apply pressure on Israel, B, that the UN organization, specifically UNRWA, but the entire humanitarian ecosystem has sided with Hamas strategically, refused to cooperate with Israel, refused and actively boycotted the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation.
That is Jonathan Conricus speaking yesterday about the unfolding humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. He pulls no punches in his assessment of Hamas's strategic success in convincing the global humanitarian ecosystem and virtually all Western governments that Israel is responsible for this crisis. Israel alone. This is the first in a series of interviews with experts being done by the state of Tel Aviv and beyond. The goal is to present the complexity behind the immediate humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip and how and why things came to this point. I'm Vivian Bercovici, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. Jonathan Conricus, Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves, Senior Fellow at FDD. Thank you so much for making time, State of Tel Aviv today.
Thank you, Vivian. As always, a pleasure to be here.
And you find yourself in Washington, D.C. now, where it's noon-ish, well, actually close to 1 o'clock. And I, of course, am in Israel holding down the fort. And it is almost 8 in the evening, which is news time, as you know, very important time in this country. I'm really glad that we're able to connect because I'm working hard to present and understand this humanitarian crisis that is upon us. And the crisis is, of course, in the Gaza Strip. And I'm speaking to people on every point of the opinion, political spectrum that I can to allow the listeners to try to sort through the facts as clearly as we can discern and present them. You have deep experience with the Gaza Strip, with humanitarian issues. So I just want to kind of open...
With the UN, with the IDF, with
all
diplomacy.
of it. Yeah, you're just like the man. He's everywhere. You really do bring tremendous expertise. And over a long period of time, what the heck is going on, Jonathan?
So what I think is going on, my assessment is that this is a milestone for Hamas. Hamas just scored a big victory yesterday. I would call it a strategic achievement. What Hamas was able to do through very clever and persistent communications and diplomatic pressure was to force Israel to basically go back, not necessarily to square one, but pretty close to square one, and really to undermine the underpinnings or the logics or the thinking behind most of the IDF operations that have been conducted for the last half year. And that is by no means a small achievement for Hamas. International pressure kept on building, amplified through a willing, complacent, and happy to trumpet Hamas message international media, and that then affected weak, cowardly, and leaders around the world that are more concerned with Muslim votes in their countries than they are concerned with truth and with a democracy defending itself against terror organizations. And I would have to say, even though I don't like saying it, but yes, also because of Israel's inaction and abysmal strategic communications, responsibility of the Prime Minister, of Minister Dermer, and of the Foreign Secretary or the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Gideon Saar, and in basically leaving that field open, vulnerable, and exposed, and Hamas exploiting it. Now, what's going on is that now Israel is not only opening up the Gaza Strip and allowing others to provide so-called humanitarian aid, whether it's the Emiratis, Egyptians, Jordanians, but Israel itself I think in a sign of really a desperate sign, is actually airdropping aid to Gazans itself from Israeli aircraft. And I could think of no other way to really to symbolize a tremendous strategic about face, which I think is very regrettable, that the IDF is now doing that as a result of international pressure, as a result of the horrible images, some of them doctored, some of them out of context, but horrible images of starving children and malnourished children in Gaza, and the relentless outpouring of pressure from humanitarian organizations, countries, institutions. And that has reached a certain boiling point, and Israel has been forced to backtrack and to do things that it has really explained and had a logic to not doing before. Yeah, so what this means on the battlefield is that there's a de facto ceasefire. Most areas of importance, the IDF will do what we call humanitarian windows, which is a sanitized word for ceasefire. Israel is ceasing fire while it's not getting anything in return. And that's a very unfortunate situation. We continue to have reports every day of Israeli soldiers, of casualties on the battlefield. Today we lost, or it was reported that we lost 2 soldiers and additional soldiers were wounded. Yesterday we had battlefield casualties in various areas, most of them in Khan Yunis, and Hamas continues to fight there. And while that is happening, IDF will be ceasing its operations for most hours of the day in other areas. And what it means is that now Hamas will gain strength in Gaza. They will gain the ability, political leverage. They will gain or enhance their control over the population. And they will be able to say that their steadfastness, and that's a very important term in Hamas terminology, sumud in Arabic, that their steadfastness was eventually true, and that they were able to be steadfast and to get what they wanted without paying anything in return. Because they, when Hamas speaks about paying anything, they think only about their fighters, their terrorists, and their leadership. They do not think about Palestinians. So when Palestinians pay a price, which they undoubtedly do in terms of suffering, discomfort, hunger, death, wounding, etc., that doesn't factor in terms of Hamas. So they haven't paid anything, and they're scoring a strategic victory. And I think what this does, bottom line, is it will prolong the war. Best case, it will prolong the war. Worst case, it can force Israel to stop operations now because we're losing momentum. But best case scenario out of what's happening now, this prolongs the suffering, it prolongs the war, it gives Hamas tailwinds, and it strengthens the bargaining position of Hamas because they see that their strategy works and that they can force concessions out of Israel without giving anything in return.
So I want to go back to the beginning of your remarks when you said yesterday represented a significant victory, triumph for Hamas. And what you're referring to, I believe, is the resumption of food aid and other aid flowing into the Gaza Strip from Israel. So what we have to do, because time is limited and I've got to get to the heart of it. Are you in any way questioning or disputing that there is a food crisis for many civilians in the Gaza Strip?
As far as I understand it, there is a food crisis. Some areas there's shortage, some areas there's constant supply. In the south, where the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is operating, there's a steady supply of food. More than 93 million meals have been provided by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and there the situation is much better. But in other areas where the IDF has already asked many months ago and ordered the civilian population to evacuate, and they have refused to evacuate, in some areas there's an acute shortage. But the bottom line is that this is a shortage that has been exasperated and doctored and leveraged by Hamas for their political and military purposes. Yes, the situation is ugly almost all over Gaza, but had it not been for the fact that Hamas has a strategic design to leverage humanitarian suffering in order to apply pressure on Israel. B, that the UN organization, specifically UNRWA, but the entire humanitarian ecosystem has sided with Hamas strategically, refused to cooperate with Israel, refused and actively boycotted the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, despite the fact that they work on the ground and they have delivered more than 90 million meals. But UN organizations have basically said, if Israel is going to present an alternative to our mechanism, which supports Hamas and extends Hamas's control over the population, we're not going to work with it. And they
Right.
refused to collect items that were delivered to Gaza. We saw 950 truckloads of aid stranded and baking in the Gaza sun on the Gaza side of the border because UN organizations refused and they hardballed. And sadly, they too have been able to force Israel's hand. So the reasons, A, B, and C, are really why the situation is so much worse than what it could have been had Israel had the wisdom to work with UN organizations like UNRWA and others and get them to channel aid where Israel defines that the aid should go to and not have them work against Israel.